Hey there, I'm Mr. Johnston. I'm going to walk you through our first 5 steps of the B flat major scale on the oboe. So before we do anything else, one good thing that I always like to double check, we're going to take a second here to do so, is we're going to talk about posture. What we can do, even if we're not in our band room, to facilitate good posture, which is going to help us play even better. So you're not going to be able to see this super well, but I'm always making sure I'm sitting at the front edge of my seat. I always say the front third. If your band director was there, he or she should be able to walk behind your chair. Like if he was walking from chair to chair, that he'd be able to stand behind it. Kind of weird, but hopefully that could help you visualize a little bit how much space we're talking about here. So if we're making sure we're sitting the right way, next thing that we got to double check is that we're sitting up straight while we're doing it. I like to think about a straight line between my shoulders down to my hips. The third thing, finally, I'm kind of going through this fast. You can reference back to this if you want to double check. When we're talking about our hand position, that I always think of our backwards C's. We never want to have our hands crushed against the instrument, but rather we want to have it opened up with the pads of our fingers on top of the keys. So take a second, double check that you've got all those parts to it. Are you sitting at the edge of your seat? Are you sitting up nice and tall, allowing you to be as tall as possible? And are your hands in a nice open C right on top of, with your pads right on top of the keys, ready to get a full amount of extension on your fingers if you need to. So double check that real quick. And awesome. So we're talking about a scale. Whenever we're doing it, is usually a series of 8 notes. It's seven different notes, and then the first and last note are always the same. Just one is just higher than the other. If you've talked about what an octave is, then the last note is going to be an octave higher than the lower one. So for B flat, whenever we start any scale, I always like to take a second to warm up on the note that we're going to always start on. So in this case, it's going to be B flat. And if you already know the fingering to that, that's fine. We're just, as a quick review in case you don't, remember that this is mirrored. So this is actually my left hand. Left hand should always be on top, right hand below. We're going to have the first finger, second finger, and then on our right hand, you're going to have your first finger down on that key. So I'm just going to take a second and play a couple of B flats, trying to make the best possible sound that I can. So when we're doing that, and then any note, we're just making sure we're using fast, steady air while we're doing that. Don't need to use a lot of air at the same time on the oboe because it's a small opening on the reed, but you do want to make sure that it's fast, like you're sizzling. If you're doing that quickly, you're gonna have a really nice in-pitch sound. So it took me a couple of tries to get to a sound that I wanted on that. So don't feel like the first one has to be really, really good. When the purpose of warming up is finding the sound that you want. So just get a couple of tries on that first note. So now that we've played a little bit, we got into the concept of our sound, we're going to talk fingering wise, going from note to note. So the first 5 notes that we're dealing with, we have B flat, we have C, D, E flat, and F. So the first one, we already talked about B flat, fingering wise. We're going to have, remember, this is the left hand. We're going to have our first finger, second finger, and then in our right hand, we're going to have the first finger in that. So we already did that B flat. Take a second, match with that fingering there. I don't recommend like holding your instrument like this. I'm just keeping my fingers out of the way so that you can see what I'm doing. So the second one, for C, we're just lifting that second finger in the left hand up on top. And so the fingers that we have left are the first finger in the left and the first finger in the right. So just take a second, go back to B flat. So you put that second finger back down. Just take a second, go from B flat to C a couple of times. We're going to go B flat, and then you lift up that second finger to go to C. And then you go back to B flat, go back to C. It's always a good idea not to just think about every note separately, but what do I need to lift, what do I need to put back down to get from note to note. That's how we get used to going from each of these notes to other notes. So I'm going to play a B flat, and I'm going to play a C next to it. And once more. This time I'm going to go B flat, C, back to B flat. Just get practice putting that second finger down. Great. So if you want a second, try that on your own. If you need more than the time I'm giving you, you're always free to pause the video, try it out on your own, and then we'll restart. So once you've done that a couple of times, you're going to go, now we can go from our second note. Remember, it's C, 1 and 1. And then we can go to D. This one's a little bit more complicated. There are more steps to this, but once you get used to it, it's not so bad. There are a lot of fingers that we put down for this. So for D, we go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So all 6 of these fingers are going to be down. However, I'm going to get really close for a second. If you look at the top finger in the left hand, you slide your finger down, you get this extra little part of key here, and that's what we call our half hole. So all of our fingers are covered, but you're going to slide that first finger halfway down so that this hole right here, so that that's open. If you don't do that, you're going to get a really low note. So we slide that first finger down, but the rest of them are covered all the way. So if you want to double check if you're getting the right sound, or if you're doing the right fingering, if you're covering all the right stuff, this is what a D should sound like. So you can double check that with yourself. So really important part of this part of the scale is practicing going from C to D. So you're sliding that first finger up and then lifting everything else up. That's got to happen at the same time. So that's why it takes a little bit of practice. It's not necessarily hard, and then you slide that finger back down when you're going up to D. It's not really hard. It's just, it takes a little bit of practice. There's a little bit more motion in the ocean here. So back down, and back to C, and back to D, and back to C. You could do this forever. And back to D, and back to C. Again, I would practice that on your own a little bit. That's probably the hardest part of this whole scale. So now I'm going to play C to D. I'm going to go back and forth for a moment. Great. So once you've done that, I would recommend going back to B flat. So you get B flat to C, and then C to D. So me practicing that would probably look something like this. I'm going to do it quickly, but I would recommend taking longer too. So the last one was B flat, C, and D together, up and then down. If you look at method books, if you look at the book that you may have started on in band, or if you start, or maybe if you're coming from a different instrument and now you're playing oboe, it was probably very similar, similar in your book. They have those first three notes, and a lot of the first couple of pages of your book is just going up and down those series of notes like that. We're doing the exact same thing here. So next note, luckily C to D was the hard one. Now D to E flat. D to E flat's a lot easier. So pay attention here, just with the camera being backwards. It'd be easy to accidentally press the wrong key. So we're at D. We have our half hole. Everything else is covered. For E flat, you have those three extra keys down there. You might only have two. But you'll have these two longer ones for sure. You're gonna put your right pinky on the bottom one, and that's how you get from D to E flat. So if it's off, you're playing D. If it's down, goes up to E flat. And that happens, you see that little key next to it moving up, and that's how you get the higher pitch. So go from D. Now, I'm moving my pinky a lot just so that you see which finger is moving. I would not recommend actually moving it that much. If I was doing it for realsies, this is what it would look like. The reason for that being, you always want to keep your fingers close to the keys, even if you don't have your fingers down on them. It helps go from note to note a little bit easier than if your fingers were all the way off and then you're putting it back on. Awesome. Now, at this point, I would do the same process. I would work maybe C to D to E flat, then back that. So I'm going to take a second. I'm going to go through a practice process. Just to give you an idea, feel free to pause the video, practice it on your own. So by the end of that, you got four notes. We're almost there. We only got one more to add. So the last one that we're gonna add to that, we're gonna have F. Now, you might know this. If F is a little weird because there's more than one way to play F. But depending on what notes you're playing before and after it, that we might have an idea which F we're supposed to use. So for this one, when we're doing our B flat major scale, most of the time, if you're using like a younger model oboe, that you're probably going to use what we call forked F. And the way that we play forked F is it's kind of similar to D. A couple of things that are different. So go from let's see, go from playing a D with the half hold down. So we got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Only half of the top keys covered. So now you're going to slide that back up, and you're going to lift the second finger on your right hand on the bottom. So you're still covering the first and third one, but the second one is up. And on the back, you're going to have an octave key where your left thumb is, and you're going to push that down. So just as a quick recap, the fingers that are down right now are the octave key in the back with the thumb, 1, 2, 3 in the left hand, and 1 and 3 in the right hand. And they call this forked F because if you kind of look at what's going on with my right hand right now, you can kind of see how it sort of looks like a fork, I guess. That's what they call it. So that's what we're going to go with. So that's our forked F. So take a second. Need slightly faster air to get this note to come out because it is a little bit higher. So we're going to double check that we got the right note. Take a second and just double check your postures. Your upper body's still nice and straight. You're still sitting the same way in your chair. So just take a second, double check that that F's coming out nice and solid. If it's not, you might have. Usually, what I see is in the left hand. Sometimes, once we get more fingers down and we're stretching our hands out a little bit more, that every once in a while you'll see the a finger not quite covering the full hole. So sometimes that'll leak air and that'll make the note not come out. So if you're having issues, double check, and that might be the problem. That's not just F. If you're having problems with D, E flat, F, that could be it. So at this point, we're gonna do the same process. I would highly encourage practicing going from E flat with the half hole up to F. So when you're making that transition, you're taking that octave key off on the back, and it's kind of hard to see. You're taking that octave key off on the back. You have to slide the half hole back down for E flat. You got to put the pinky down, and that second finger in the right hand is going to come back down. So there's a couple of different things happening at the same time. None of them are really difficult. It's just that coordinating all of it at once. And remember, when we're going from a fingering to fingering, even if it's slow music, even if it's fast music, we're moving our fingers back and forth as quickly as we can. So just take a second, just practice that. Just getting used to that motion. That's one thing that I wish I had done more when I first started working on scales. I just tried to play them right away, and I didn't really think about what the motion between the notes was. So let's try and make this happen. I'm going to start on E flat, go up to F. I'm going to do that a couple of times. Now, the next step, if you're doing it slowly, which I always recommend, before we try and put all 5 notes together, you might try and do note 3, 4, and 5. So we might do D, E flat, and F, sort of like we did B flat, C, and D before, and that kind of connects those two ideas together. So let's do that for a second. So take a second, try it on your own. If you need time to pause the video, go for it. The next thing that we're gonna do, and I'm gonna actually put time in here for you to try it on your own, and we're gonna have time that we're gonna try and play it together. We're gonna do the full 5 notes. We're gonna practice it going up, then we're gonna practice it going down. So before we do that, let's review our fingerings really quick. We're gonna start with B flat at the bottom, 1, 2, and 1. So show me a B flat. Now I'll go to C, lifting that second finger. And go to D. We're working with that half hole. And E flat. And F. Now we're going to go backwards. We're still on F. And we're going to E flat. We're going to go to D. And C. And B flat. And if you're working on just fingerings, or if you're at home and you can't play, you can still practice. Even if you can't play at home, you can still practice the fingerings. If I'm trying to learn how to do my scale a little bit faster, I might say the note while I'm doing it. B flat, C, D, E flat, F, F, E flat, D, C, B flat. I can do this. I'm really quiet while I'm doing it. E flat, C, D, E flat, F, F, E flat, D, C, B flat. So that's something you might try. Okay, so not that fast, but we're going to play it together. second, how did that go for you? If you have anything that that didn't quite go right, it's all good. The important thing about practicing is identifying something that may not have gone as well as you want. See if you can figure out why it happened, and then try it again. See if you can fix it this time. Cool. Let's do it one more time. Cool. Hopefully it went better that time. If it didn't, same deal. See if you can identify something that didn't go so well. See what you can do to fix it. Making mistakes is okay. The only thing that's not okay is giving up. Cool. All right. Last thing we're going to do, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go back down. So we're going to start in F. We're going to go back down to B flat. Double check your F real quick. There we go. Ready? And the very last thing we're gonna do it going up. We're gonna take a brief pause, and we're gonna go back down. So let's try it together. Remember, you can pause the video if you want to get another crack at that. It's all good. There we go. And up and down. 1, 2, 3. Pause starting on F, and 2, ready, and there you go. That's the first 5 notes of the scale. You can look, if you have a fingering chart in a book, you can see what those last couple of notes are, G, A, and B flat. You're most of the way there. You've got 3 more to do before you get a complete B flat scale, which is awesome. If you don't, you can Google it online. Some other resources before we finish up here, some other resources I would definitely recommend in your practice are definitely a metronome. I didn't use one in this video because I'm using my phone to record. I can't do both at once. But if you're hooked up to Wi-Fi, you go online, you can find a bunch of apps that are free. If you just type in metronome, METRONOME, if you put metronome into the Apple Store or the Android Store, you're going to find a bunch of free ones. I would definitely use that because it's going to help you play in time and practice playing in time while you're doing this stuff. Don't be afraid to practice stuff slow, okay? I was always in a rush to try and get everything done, and it took me way longer to get it worked out because I didn't just slow down and let the process happen. The one thing I think is cool about doing this practicing alone, if you have the ability to, is that don't be afraid to not sound great when you're practicing. You know, the goal is the things that we play, we want to sound good on, but I always say to my students that usually you got to sound bad on something before you can sound good on something. So don't be so afraid of not sounding your best that you're not trying new things and missing the point of why you're practicing something in the first place. So don't be afraid. Just keep at it, and you're going to be good to go. Hopefully something in this video was helpful. You can always go back and look at something if you forget something that we talked about. So hope you're doing well. Stay safe.